So I wanted to share a little project that I've been working on. What I wanted to do was I wanted to fabricate things like for rapid prototyping, for creating different ideas, different structures, different mechanisms. I didn't have a 3D printer, and I thought, oh, can I come up with a way of building something that doesn't require specialized equipment like that, but something that was relatively inexpensive and something that was accessible to a wide range of people. So I started playing around with hot glue and sticks. And it sounds kind of silly, but it actually is pretty relaxing. It's fun to do, and you can come up with all kinds of crazy new ideas, new inventions, new innovations just by playing around. You can gain a visceral sense of mathematics and geometry and structure. Here's some of the things that I built using this. Some of them are static structures, like this pyramid, and some are actually dynamic. Let me tell you what you need. First, you need a hot glue gun. When you're working with it, the tip gets pretty hot, but you don't have to touch the nozzle of the glue. You just have to be aware not to touch it. The second thing is parchment paper, which is used for cooking. Then you'll need sticks. These ones are about 6 inches. These are a foot long and 3/16 of an inch. You can even use toothpicks if you want to make smaller projects. Masking tape is handy to have, and then glue sticks, and I'll put all these prices up onto the screen here. So what I want to build today is called a Kaleidocycle. A Kaleidocycle, you may notice, a fidget toy. These are usually where you see them. For example, if you go on YouTube and look up origami Kaleidocycle, you'll see instructions for building this thing here that shifts infinitely. It spins around its ring axis, so it has a ring axis like this, and that's its only degree of freedom, and you can keep rotating this thing forever and put different designs on it. It's pretty fascinating. So I wanted to build a big one. Here's another example. I just picked this up. I saw it at a store and I was like, that is really cool. I'm always on the lookout for new puzzles and toys and things like that. So this thing can form all kinds of shapes. So for example, now it's a cube. So this thing you can see also is a Kaleidocycle. This one has a lot more degrees of freedom, so it moves around in some really interesting ways. You can see that it continues to spin around this interior axis, and then you can create all these different shapes out of it. This one only has 1 degree of freedom around its ring axis. This actually has multiple degrees of freedom. As you can see, it can move around, and that is maybe a detriment in some cases, but in other cases, this might be an advantage. And it's really interesting to study. I mean, you could probably create a whole mathematical discipline solving the problem of, like, for example, chains, like an actual chain that you would wear around your neck, or a bracelet or something. Like, how can that deform and tangle, or chain on say an anchor, for example, or a protein chain. This could have applications to, folding protein structures that are very important for studying diseases and everything. And I mean, Alzheimer's disease is basically caused by misfolded proteins. I think it's like there's a fascinating amount of applications that you could use this for. But it's fun, so that's really the important thing. I mean, imagine if this was like some kind of robot and you had fins attached on these edges, on all these edges, and it was moving like this and swimming through some kind of liquid. If you had a mechanism to drive it, I don't know how you would do that. Maybe we'll figure that out later. But this thing, it could be some kind of valve. It could be a satellite that points in one direction and then it just sort of inverts itself. Something that could turn around and look the opposite direction without having to actually rotate. This could be a molecular machine. Instead of thinking about these edges here, think about these points as being atoms, and these atoms being in this configuration like a molecule. So these can form different crystals, and you could actually apply this type of knowledge to making new materials. I mean, imagine that you had a material like this. Obviously this isn't rigid, but atomic bombs are incredibly rigid. And if they're in the right geometry, you could possibly create a material that was just atoms thick, and it could be incredibly rigid or flexible or change shapes depending on what you wanted. So there's all kinds of applications to that. Anyway, let's get into it. So we're going to start building these triangles here, individual triangles. In order to do it, it's helpful but not necessary to have a template, a grid composed of equilateral triangle. I'll show you how to do that. I'm going to use some big paper. Need a straight edge of some kind, a Sharpie or a black marker. A pencil helps. A compass or a protractor so that you can make circles. When we work with these, because they're all the same length, when we assemble these into a triangle, it's going to automatically be 60-degree angles when we're gluing these things together. However, because you're doing one step at a time, you're going to be gluing the first two together without this piece. That's why it's nice to have a grid underneath you while you're working so you can get the angles correctly. So the first thing we're going to do is make a bunch of circles. Doesn't matter how big the circle is. Now we're going to draw a line roughly parallel to this edge through the center of the circle. And then we're going to take the point of our compass again and put it right where they intersect. And again, we're going to keep going down the line here like this. Now we're going to start doing them at these intersections where the two circles meet up here. And now we're going to go up here where these circles meet. I'm going to switch over to a marker now to get darker lines because this is actually what I'm after, even though this looks super cool. And now we're going to connect these points here, like this way. And now we're going to do the same thing, connecting these points here. There we go. I have two of them now because I made this one and I wasn't filming. So now I'm going to take my parchment paper and prepare the surface that I'm working on. Now I can slide my templates under the parchment paper. Let's get that glue gun plugged in, fired up. That's on. This usually takes about 10-15 minutes to get hot. Okay, so we got our hot glue gun all warmed up. We're gonna put a dot of glue right here, that much. And we're gonna put our sticks together and line them up, and then we're gonna pull it into the glue like this. So we want the two edges of the dowel to touch each other. There's gonna be a little empty space on the tip. And again, we'll just pull this together. And we'll let those dry. I gave it 10 minutes to dry, to cool. We're just gonna wiggle it a little bit back and forth. Oh yeah, that's cool to touch. You can see these things slip right off. And a lot of times they get this weird little membrane here. Also, you're gonna end up with these really thin threads of glue. We're just gonna clean that off real quick. Or don't do it. I don't care. I just like it to be neat. All right, so we're gonna take one of these and finish off the triangle. I wouldn't try gluing two corners together at the same time. It's way easier and you end up with way better results by focusing on one task at a time. Once you start trying to glue two, you're gonna end up with two really bad joints. I wouldn't recommend it. It's also handy to have these unfinished pieces, as we'll see later. Give them a little wiggle. Cool to the touch. Time for the last sections to get glued. You might have to hold these ones a little bit longer than the other ones because it might be slightly off the other angle. So we'll just hold it in place for a little bit. I'm also blowing on this right now just to get it to cool down faster. All right, let those dry now. These should be dry. You'll notice on one side we get a nice flat edge here, and the other side we get kind of a bubbly, blobby shape, which is fine. But if you wanted to, you could actually do another tiny bit of glue and hit up the other side, and these end up being pretty strong. It's more an aesthetic thing if you want to do that. Okay, so we have our triangles here, and some unfinished open ones too. We're gonna need these. Now, let's move into 3D. There's two ways to do this. I'm gonna talk about one way that is easier, and that is using the triangles themselves to assemble the tetrahedron. The reason this is easier is because you don't have to worry about as many variables at the same time with this method. Basically, what you can do is glue or tape 4 of these together like this. The other advantage is that if you're just taping this or using string or cable ties or whatever, is that you can take it apart and reuse the triangles for a different project. But it uses more material. So I would say, like, for younger people, this is the way to go, because you're only ever having to focus on one joint at a time. To do this like this, there's a bit of juggling you have to do that makes it a little bit more difficult. Just keep that in mind. You can do it like this. You assemble your tetrahedrons this way. I'm not going to do that right now. What we're going to do is take a finished triangle and an open triangle here. And we're gonna put these together like this. In order to do that, we have to hold it together and glue one joint at a time. In order to keep it from falling or tipping over, we can use an additional stick to keep it from tipping over. You can see, like, this is not easy to do. The important thing is that we focus on the angle that we're gluing. We want that to be as good as possible. The other things will fall into place as we move forward. So let's do that. We're gonna glue the first one now. We're gonna do the same thing that we were doing before. We're gonna line it up at one of these angles here, and this other one is gonna come along this way and finish that off. This has to be tipped a little bit, and we'll use this to kind of check and make sure it's about right. These two angles together, and I'm making sure this is roughly in the right spot. Oh, that's good. We're just gonna quickly do this. So I'm gonna take this away. I'm just gonna hold it like that for a little bit and make sure that the joint is correct. Corner. Let's check. When checking to see if it's dry, swivel it back and forth along this plane, and then you won't get too much deformation there. If you lift it off, this glue might stick and stretch, and you're going to mess up the joint. Do the remaining triangle here. You'll notice, like, some of these joints aren't glued at all. We'll do that later once we have the form completely solidified. I just want to bring attention to this corner here so you can see how these are lining up. You want them touching right there in the center. So now we have just the one loose corner here. The geometry is important. That's what gives it its strength and solidity. Now we can go ahead and glue some of these corners that didn't get any glue yet. And that's just going to make the form a lot more strong. So you can see here we have a gap. We have a gap here. We have a gap here. All right, so those are the steps you need to create a tetrahedron. So it's another day. I finished up all the tetrahedron and cleaned up the workspace. So now we are ready to build stuff out of this. So I'm going to use masking tape because it's not going to leave a sticky residue on here, but it's strong enough for demonstration purposes. I'm going to tape them here and here. So now this can rotate back and forth like this. Now the next side we're going to tape is this edge here, which is opposite. Next. So this edge is not touching either one of these two that are taped, so that's the next one we're going to do. So we'll do that one next. A bit of wishful thinking came into play here, and that's something that's important to recognize when you're working on inventions or innovations or designs or anything like that. Is you have an idea and you see a symmetry or something that's beautiful and you think, oh, that's gotta work. So this is the structure of a flexigon, which is what we set out to do, like the fidget spinner. But as you can see, it's actually running into itself. To be honest, it's so close. You could get away with using rubber bands or something elastic in place of the tape, and it will stretch, go into its infinite spinning structure. And you can see these sides can't reach each other, clear that angle. And the reason is because a flexigon does not have a regular tetrahedron, meaning it's not made out of all equilateral triangles. It actually has a tiny, oh, here it is. These triangles here, if we look at the blue one, these two sides are equal, but this one is a little bit short, and that's actually what helps it clear straight through. Could build one with the correct dimensions. I haven't figured out the ratio yet. See, it almost looks like an equilateral triangle. And I even thought that it was slightly off just because of the way that the person designed the origami. And I had it in my head like maybe that's possibly those are regular tetrahedrons. Turns out no, it's not. However, I can add another link to this thing. That could be interesting. We'll see what it looks like. So I'm gonna put 2 more links. I do want to say though that the equilateral regular tetrahedrons are quite interesting from a structural standpoint. The way they tessellate space, 3D space, is pretty fascinating, and I think the next video I'm going to cover that because there's just some surprising things that come out of it. And who knows, this might have some interesting properties as well. I've actually never seen an 8 tetrahedron flexigon before. All right, let's tape that last joint together. Should be these right here. Well, that's interesting. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope everything was clear. I tried to spend enough time to carefully explain all the steps to this, and I can't wait to see what you guys can do with this technique. All right, bye.